I'm Daniel. What we call the Zen school is really a mix of several different things. It includes the original teachings of the Buddha, which I call first turning Buddhism, and also sort of includes the spirit of Chinese culture at the time. So Buddhism in India had been really heavily in philosophy and debate and putting all the different teachings into categories and things. And when it got to China, the Chinese spiritual culture was a little different. They wanted simpler things. So Buddhism, in that way, it sort of adapted because the people weren't interested in questions the like of how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. Those kinds of questions were what people were debating in Indian Buddhism. And in China, they had Taoism, which is just a simpler, down-to-earth spirituality. And Buddhism adapted and became more like that. What we call Zen meditation is a method for training the mind that was practiced in first turning Buddhism and in what we call the Great Way or Mahayana Buddhism. The original word is dhyana, which means concentration or quiet meditation. So when we talk about the Zen tradition, we're really talking about the tradition that practices meditation or the tradition that makes a big deal out of meditation. But if we're honest, a lot of Buddhist traditions practice meditation now, although that wasn't the case when the Zen tradition started. The Zen tradition is also has historically sometimes been called the mind school or the prajna school, which I think might have been a cooler name. Prajna is transcendent wisdom. This is because the tradition is about training the mind in order to engage our true selves. But while the tradition started out as a get back to meditation kind of bare bones approach, it slowly deviated from that, and sometimes moving away from its roots, as traditions often do, as spiritual traditions often do. In plenty of Zen circles, you won't see anything resembling a bare bones approach. There's a lot of things that have been added. Anyway, the earliest Zen teachers really wanted to set Zen apart. There were a lot of Buddhist traditions in China at the time, and some of them really said the path to enlightenment was very easy. The truth is beyond words. It's about practice and not study. That's the important point that the Zen teachers were trying to emphasize. They thought too many people were into studying Buddhism and not many were actually practicing Buddhism, actually sitting down on the cushion, actually trying to be fully present. Zen is not something you learn about. It isn't something you study, and it isn't something you are. It's something you do. And that is how Zen teachers started telling stories. Stories are words too, though. Obviously, they're made up of words. The Zen stories are words that tell you how to go beyond words. That's the intent. Stories are about people who were attached to words and had that attachment shattered. Kind of silly and circular if we really think about it. Stories are helpful because they can be used to illustrate a point. Sometimes the difference between a successful religion and one that struggles is based entirely on which religion has better stories. We love stories. Here's a story. The Buddha stood at a place called Vulture Peak in front of a bunch of people. There were monks and nuns and also regular people like you and me. It's said that there were 1 million people, but that seems far-fetched and absurd. 1 million people couldn't have heard him. It's said that spirits and celestial beings were there too, but I don't believe those are real, so we'll set those aside. People were expecting a teaching, and the Buddha just stood there, not saying anything. Everyone was just sitting there waiting, looking around awkwardly. I'm imagining what it'd be like to go to a concert and see the band just standing on stage not performing, and I think it's kind of like that. Then the Buddha held up a pretty flower and twirled it, showing everyone. So still everyone was standing around awkwardly, and the guy who they call Kasyapa, the elder, he just smiled. So everybody else is just looking around like, what's going on? They had great expectations. The Buddha's going to give a teaching. I'm so excited. And so then they were disappointed because they had these expectations. And Kasyapa the elder was the only one who was just there. He was just present, and when he saw a pretty flower, he just saw a pretty flower. That's supposed to be the beginning of the Zen tradition. They say Kasyapa was the first Zen teacher. They say teachings were entrusted to him because he understood the truth that's beyond words. There is as much truth in a pretty flower as there is in a teaching, and enlightenment is right here, it's everywhere. That's the message. I once heard someone say, just because it's made up doesn't mean it's less true. Kasyapa was a real person and was considered one of the best monks in the early Sangha. The point of the story isn't this really happened, or maybe originally that was its purpose, but we don't have to pretend it really happened now. No one wrote about this, as far as we can tell, or told the story at all until hundreds of years after the Buddha's death. So we can put all that aside, but the point is that it tells us something. Talking about Buddhism is great. Learning about Buddhism is great too, but sometimes life is about paying attention and noticing little things. Sometimes it's about looking at a pretty flower. So stop and smell the roses. Don't attach to words so much. Even Buddhist words. The truth is right here. That being said, now I wonder if people in the Zen tradition are becoming a little too attached to stories, if they're thinking of them as important rather than as useful teaching tools. I hope we don't forget that the tradition came from teachers who wanted a simpler, back-to-basics approach to Buddhism because Buddhism had gotten really weird. Zen is full of stories like this of some teacher pointing the way in a really creative way, and that's really what sets Zen apart from most other branches of Buddhism. It's all about pointing the way, and teachers are still pointing the way, and we just have to learn how to look. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Have a good day.